I've always been a light sleeper, but I never imagined that this characteristic would become the main reason why my entire life would begin to crumble. For years, every morning, exactly at 3 a.m., I would be woken by the same soft, almost imperceptible sound of the door latch being carefully lifted, as if someone were trying not to wake even a ghost. At first, it seemed like just a strange habit of my husband's. He said he needed to take care of work things, and that this was the only time when no one bothered him. I believed him, of course. Trusting him has always been natural for me. It never occurred to me that a simple door movement could hide a universe of secrets. But, as time went on, the repetition started to bother me. It wasn't just the sound. It was the certainty that he always chose. Same time, it was as if he were following a ritual. He didn't change for a single minute. It was always at 3 a.m., as if that were the exact moment his other life began, and ours, the one I thought we had together, was put on pause. And no matter how much I told myself I was exaggerating, that I was making things up to justify my insomnia, there was something about that habit that simply didn't fit. I remember one particular early morning, that little click echoed through the house, and I woke abruptly, my heart racing, almost as if my body had already learned to dread that hour before my mind even realized it. I began to hear his every step toward the living room door. He walked slowly, but not slowly enough to seem natural. It was as if he had practiced not making a sound. Seconds later, total silence filled the house, and I knew he had already left. I tossed and turned in bed, trying to fall back asleep, but the feeling of unease clung to my chest like a child clinging to the sheets, and in truth, I knew exactly what was tormenting me. It was the lack of explanation, the fact that he never clearly told me what he was doing at that time, the way he would look away when I asked, the way he would make up hasty excuses when he returned at dawn, as if I were bothering him simply for wanting to understand my own husband's life. For years, I tried to ignore it. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that important, that maybe it was just work, maybe it was anxiety, maybe it was something else that I didn't have the right to question. But in truth, that was precisely the problem. He had the right. I was his wife. I shared the same bed, the same table, the same roof. Yet, it seemed there was a part of him, a very large part, that I had never known. And it was on that particular night, while I was clutching the pillowcase between my fingers trying to silence my thoughts, that something inside me finally screamed louder than any excuse I could make up. A strong, direct voice, impossible to ignore, told me, for years I thought it was just work. But that night, something inside me told me it wasn't. That phrase didn't just come from my mouth, it came from my soul. It was as if, for the first time, I admitted to myself that something was profoundly wrong. It was as if a crack had opened in the floor of our marriage, revealing a darkness I was afraid to look at, but needed to. Deep down, I knew that Dawn would not be like the others. Something in me, perhaps instinct, perhaps fear, had changed forever. From that moment on, every detail began to take on a different weight. His silence, once natural, transformed into suspicion. His tired gaze gained a new meaning. And the door, which had previously only opened, now seemed to shout, "Pay attention." It was as if everything had been trying to warn me for years, and finally, I had been able to listen. I sat on the bed, the house shrouded in twilight, and felt my heart pounding so hard I was afraid he would wake up. But of course, he was already gone. He always was. I took a deep breath and stared at the bedroom door, as if it could answer the questions I hid even from myself. It was then that a spark, the first of many, lit inside me. Curiosity, mixed with fear and a pang of courage, began to take shape. The truth is, at that moment, something broke. And when something breaks inside a woman who has always borne her fears and questions alone, there's no going back. That would be the night everything would change. The night I would finally open my eyes. The night that would lead me to follow in my husband's footsteps and discover the life he was hiding from me. After that early morning, when something inside me finally screamed that something was wrong, I started to see my husband in a different light. And it didn't take long to realize that his behavior hadn't just changed during those early morning hours. Gradually, it was as if he had started to absent himself from the house even when he was sitting on the sofa, just a few meters away from me. He would arrive home later and later from work, always following the same routine. He would sigh deeply, toss his briefcase aside, loosen his tie, and say in that tired voice, "Long day." At first, I would approach him, ask how it had been, try to start a conversation. He would respond with short phrases, sometimes just with a normal, "as always," or "I'll tell you later." But that later never came. The conversation would die there, in the hallway, along with my desire to pretend everything was all right. His gaze, which had previously sought me out, now lingered on me as if I were part of the scenery. At the dinner table, he would stare at his plate, fidgeting with his food without actually eating, as if he were somewhere else. Sometimes I would call his name 2 or 3 times before he reacted, as if snapping out of a trance. And when I asked him what he was thinking about, he always came up with the same ready answer. Work stuff, don't worry. But now I didn't believe him so easily anymore. The conversations, which used to last for hours, gradually turned into monologues from me and automatic responses from him. I would talk about my day, the simple things around the house, something I had read or seen, and he would respond with an cool, I know. Sometimes, not even that. There were moments when I would finish a sentence and realize he hadn't even heard me because his eyes were glued to his phone screen. And there, between silent bites and empty stares, I began to feel the worst kind of loneliness, the kind that happens when you're right next to someone. His cell phone, in fact, became his new inseparable companion. Before, he would leave the device lying around the house, sometimes even forgetting where he had put it. Suddenly, he started carrying his phone everywhere: bathroom, bedroom, kitchen. If I approached while he was using the device, he would press the lock button so quickly it seemed like a reflex. Notifications started appearing more frequently, but he always put it on silent, turned the screen face down, or simply put it in his pocket. One night, while we were watching television, the cell phone vibrated on the coffee table. Instinctively, I looked at the screen. I couldn't read the entire message, but I saw a name I'd never seen before. He noticed my gaze immediately. In a brusque movement, he grabbed the device, locked it, and muttered, "It's something from work." But the way he swallowed hard, as if he'd been caught red-handed, told me everything he didn't have the courage to say. His friends also began to notice that he wasn't the same anymore. Before, he was the kind of person who livened up any room, who cracked jokes, who told stories. Suddenly, he started avoiding gatherings, making excuses, refusing invitations. When he finally showed up at a get-together or barbecue, he remained silent, distant, fiddling with his phone as if he were merely fulfilling a social obligation. One of our mutual friends even commented to me, in a light tone, but one that hurt inside, "He's acting differently, isn't he? Kind of spaced. Out, did something happen?" At that moment, I blurted out the automatic response I had been preparing for myself for weeks. It's just stress. A lot going on at work." That's how I tried to maintain the illusion that everything was temporary, that it would only be a phase. I repeated it like a mantra. "It's just stress. Everyone goes through this. It'll get better soon." But no matter how much the words tried to build a wall of tranquility, my heart demolished everything with a single feeling: fear. I realized that he was not only emotionally distant, but also seemed to be carrying a weight he didn't share with me. Sometimes I'd find him standing in the middle of the hallway, staring blankly into space, as if trying to solve an impossible equation in his own head. When he noticed me watching him, he'd force a smile and say, "Everything's fine." But the problem is, when someone insists so much that they're okay, it's usually because they're not. I even suggested we take a few days off, a short trip, a weekend just the two of us, like we used to do at the beginning of our marriage. I remember his reaction like it was yesterday. He took a few seconds to answer, as if he were calculating something. Then he said he couldn't, that the moment at work was too delicate, that taking time off now would be irresponsible. I nodded, but inside I felt like I'd been rejected not only for the trip, but for trying to reconnect. The truth is, the more his strange behavior increased, the more I diminished myself. I did everything I could to avoid arguing, to avoid pressuring him, to avoid seeming paranoid. Instead of asking what I really wanted to know, "Where are you going at 3 in the morning?" I asked if he wanted coffee, if he wanted me to prepare something to eat, if he needed help with anything. I tried to be supportive when, in reality, I was the most lost one in that situation. And yet, I clung tightly to the same justification. It's just stress. It's just a phase. He's still the same man. He's just overwhelmed. I used to say that to others. I used to say that to myself. But at night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling while listening to the clock ticking away, I knew that explanation wasn't enough anymore. Because it's one thing for someone to get tired. It's quite another for someone to drift away. And he wasn't just tired. He was far away, far from me, far from our home, far from who he claimed to be. And deep down, I knew, when behavior starts, screaming, It's because the truth is knocking at the door, even if we're still trying to pretend it's not about us. Over time, his strange behavior stopped being minor anxieties and began to transform into clear signs, silent clues that seemed to scream what I still didn't have the courage to admit. It was as if reality, tired of seeing me ignore the obvious, finally began to nudge me from the corners, through smells, through stains I hadn't even noticed before. And suddenly, every detail became important. The first thing that caught my attention was a strange smell on his clothes. It wasn't women's perfume, alcohol, or cigarettes. In fact, it was something even stranger, like the smell of fresh paint mixed with old dust, almost as if he had entered a forgotten warehouse or spent hours somewhere under renovation. It simply didn't match his job. He was a financial analyst. His office was clean, modern, smelled of air conditioning and coffee. Nothing in that place could justify that odor. I remember one particular day when he arrived later than usual. His shirt was wrinkled, but not in the typical way that comes from wearing a seatbelt or working long hours. It was wrinkled in an irregular way, as if he had changed clothes in a hurry, as if he had put something on beforehand and needed to hide it. And when he passed by me to go straight to the shower, the smell hit him hard. That smell of paint, dust, and something metallic, almost ferrous. My heart froze. I wanted to ask. I wanted to demand an explanation, but the words got stuck in my throat. Later, while he slept, I discreetly took his shirt to the laundry basket, and it was when I turned the garment over that I saw the first concrete evidence, a small blue stain, like wall paint, right on the inside hem. My husband never dabbled in painting, never even touched a light bulb without complaining. He had no renovation projects, no artistic hobbies, no excuse that could justify it. The next day, when he got home from work, I tried a light-hearted confrontation, an innocent question. Or at least, that's how I tried to phrase it. I waited for him to finish dinner, left the TV on to create a neutral atmosphere, and then blurted out, almost casually, "Honey, yesterday I smelled something strange on your clothes. Did you go somewhere that was under renovation?" He paused for a second too quick to think of a sincere answer, and said, "Ah, I think I passed close to a construction site when I was taking a shortcut. The street was closed." Except my husband never took shortcuts. He always took the same route, almost religiously. Besides, there was no road work on that route. I knew this because I myself passed by there to go to the market or the pharmacy. But at that moment, I smiled and nodded as if I believed him. Days passed, and I began to notice more and more inconsistencies. Those ink stains would occasionally appear in different colors: blue, white, yellow, always small, always discreet, as if he tried to clean them before arriving home. And the smells changed too. Sometimes he would arrive smelling of old wood, other times of heavy cleaning like those products used in hospitals, warehouses, or abandoned buildings. None of this matched what he claimed to do. One night, while he was taking a shower, his cell phone vibrated on the bedside table. It was a notification that appeared briefly on the screen before disappearing. I only had time to see one word: delivered. The sender's name was something I'd never seen before, a short name, initials, and last name, as if it were the contact of someone he didn't want me to recognize. My heart raced so fast I felt a chill run down my spine. When he came out of the shower and saw that the phone wasn't exactly where he'd left it, he looked at me with a strange expression, half suspicious, half defensive. "Did you touch my phone?" he asked. I replied in the same tone he used to hide things, calm but fake. "Of course not. I only bumped into it when I went to get my book." He didn't say anything, but he put his phone in his pocket, in the bedroom, at home, at night. Who does this? From that moment on, it wasn't just the details that were wrong. It was everything. His energy, his silence, the way his eyes avoided mine, his rush to get into the car in the morning. He was always anxious, glancing at his watch every few minutes, as if he had a secret appointment to keep. I noticed his trembling hands sometimes, the way he looked away when I tried to bring up the subject. He seemed to sense that I was getting too close to the truth. That's when I started noticing something new, a kind of fine dust on his shoes, like dry earth, but not the usual earth from our neighborhood. It was a different color, almost orange, reminiscent of the soil in old places, warehouses, abandoned buildings. Again, it had nothing to do with his work environment. One day, with my heart in my mouth, I decided to ask directly. Not out of anger, but with vulnerability, like someone silently crying out for help. "Do you want to tell me something? Is something happening at work? Or with you?" He hesitated for a moment, and I saw the panic in his eyes. It was quick, but I saw it. This kind of hesitation can't be manufactured. Not when you love someone. No, no. Everything is the same, he replied, but his voice gave everything away. It was short, tense, as if talking too much was dangerous. That's when my own internal audience, my fears, my intuition, my hope, started creating theories, and I realized that anyone watching this story from the outside would be doing the same, because each new piece seemed to fit into a puzzle that I didn't want to assemble, but that was already forming before my eyes. He was hiding something, something big, something that didn't go well with work, nor with tiredness, nor with stress, and for the first time I understood. They were no longer just loose details. It was a pattern, and patterns never lie. Some events in life don't happen with noise. They don't arrive with explosions or fights. Sometimes all it takes to destroy trust is a single small lie, so small that to anyone else it would seem insignificant. But when you're already vulnerable, when your heart is trained to perceive every strange vibration, that little lie hits hard, hits deep, and opens a crack from which the same light never shines again. It was a Thursday afternoon. I remember it as if it happened minutes ago. He left the house saying the same excuse, repeated, worn out, almost rehearsed. I need to go to the office to sort out some pending reports. The way he spoke was perfectly normal, but his gaze carried something different. It was the kind of gaze that flees, that runs away to avoid giving itself away. Still, I nodded, gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, and wished him good luck at work. But when he left through the door, my chest filled with that horrible mixture of anxiety, distrust, and pain. It was as if my whole body had understood the truth that my mind still refused to acknowledge. I tried to ignore it. I tried to keep doing my chores. I even tried to convince myself that there was no real reason to worry. But everything inside me screamed. The silence of the house seemed heavier. The hours dragged on, and each minute fueled that feeling that something was deeply wrong. And then, I don't know exactly why, I decided to call his office. Perhaps I wanted to hear a familiar voice to confirm that he was really there, that everything was all right, that I was the crazy one in the story. But life, when it tries to open our eyes, is not usually kind. The secretary answered in her usual calm voice. Good afternoon, Company X. I took a deep breath before asking, is my husband Daniel around? He said he was going to take care of some things at the office. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, a silence that, for me, lasted for centuries. Then she replied completely naturally, oh dear, there's no one here today. The office closed early for system maintenance. Everyone was dismissed before lunch. It was as if someone had pulled the rug out from under me. My world silently collapsed. It wasn't a suspicion. It wasn't an impression. It wasn't a misinterpretation. It was a fact, a clear lie. And a lie only becomes devastating when it breaks the trust that sustained everything else. I thanked the secretary with a trembling voice, hung up the phone, and stood in the middle of the room for long minutes, trying to understand what had just happened. My heart was pounding so hard it seemed to echo off the walls. My hands were cold, my face burned, and a feeling of emptiness filled my chest. Why? I kept repeating to myself. Why would you lie about something so simple? That was what hurt the most. It wasn't a major discovery. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't an outright betrayal. It was a small lie, but full of meaning. If he was lying about where he was, what else was he lying about? I felt reality hit me hard, and then came the trigger that affects anyone who has ever truly loved someone. When something doesn't make sense, it hurts to doubt the one you love. The pain wasn't just from him having lied. It was the pain of feeling that I could no longer trust the man with whom I shared my life. It was the pain of realizing that perhaps the story I believed I was living wasn't the same story he was living with. Me. I walked around the room as if I were floating. My thoughts came and went, trying to find justifications, explanations, coincidences. Perhaps the secretary got confused. Maybe he went back there after everyone had left. Maybe I'm exaggerating. But deep down, way down deep, I knew. The lie was real. And a woman always senses when something changes. Always. I sat on the sofa and mentally reviewed all the signs I had been ignoring. Strange smells in clothes, the impossible to explain stains, departures at 3 a.m, the cell phone he was hiding, the distant gaze, prepared, rehearsed answers, the silence that grew between us like a wall. And then, at that moment, everything took on a new dimension. They weren't coincidences. They weren't stress. They weren't phases. They were signs that I refused to see. The following hours were torment. I tried not to look at the clock, but each minute seemed to mock my anguish. Where was he? With whom? Doing what? Because if it wasn't in the office, where was it? When I finally heard the key turning in the door, my heart raced. He came in with the same tired expression as always, tried to smile and said, "Tough day today." And that phrase, repeated so many times, now seemed like an insult. I didn't say anything. Not at that moment. I wanted to hear it from him. I wanted to see if he would have the courage to repeat the lie in front of me. "And how was it at the office?" I asked in the most neutral voice I could muster. He answered too quickly. "The usual chaos. I had to sort out a lot of things. The ground disappeared again. That was it." He wasn't just hiding something. He was fabricating a parallel reality, hoping that I would never cross the threshold of truth. The emotional impact was devastating. I felt small, fragile, betrayed, not through a grand cinematic story, but through simple words. And the worst part is that simple lies are the ones that hurt the most, because they prove that the person didn't lie out of necessity, but by choice. Right then, in that moment, I understood. There is a before and an after this type of discovery. And from that day on, I was no longer the same woman. I no longer looked at my husband the same way. Trust wasn't broken. It crumbled. And deep down, I knew that little lie was just the tip of the iceberg, the first visible crack in a much larger, much deeper truth, and much more frightening. After that call to the office and the lie told while looking me straight in the eye, something inside me stopped trying to deceive itself. I could no longer go back to that comfortable place where everything could be explained with stress or a difficult phase. The truth had knocked on my door, albeit timidly, albeit in the form of a small lie, and now I knew that if I continued pretending not to see it, I would be lying to myself. The following days were strange. I was there, living the routine, doing the same things as always, but nothing was the same. Every movement of his seemed calculated, every outing seemed suspicious, every silence seemed to hide a phrase he didn't want to utter, and above all, there was what had become the main stage for secrets. 3 a.m. That hour came alive. It ceased to be just a number on the clock and transformed into a character. I went to bed earlier, but I didn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, listening to the sound of my own breathing, waiting. It was almost like waiting for the start of a show I hadn't bought a ticket to see, but would be forced to watch anyway. That particular night, something was different. I can't say if it was the way he ate dinner in silence, or the automatic way he kissed my forehead before lying down. But there was a strange energy in the air, almost palpable. He fell asleep too quickly, or pretended very well. I, on the other hand, remained awake, feeling each beat of my heart as if it were a clock inside my chest marking the countdown. When the internal alarm clock of the early mornings rang, not on the device but in my intuition, I was already awake. I turned my head to the side and watched. He moved slowly, as he always did, trying not to wake me. First, he carefully pulled back the sheet. Then, he sat on the edge of the bed for a few seconds, as if listening to the silence of the house. Next, he got up, picked up the pants he had already set aside, the neutral shirt, the shoes. Every gesture seemed rehearsed. I closed my eyes for a moment, pretending to sleep, but inside my mind was screaming. And now, when I heard the soft sound of the bedroom door opening, I felt a lump in my throat. That sound, which had so often heralded another night of doubt, would now be the starting point. I waited a few seconds, maybe a minute. Then I sat on the bed, my whole body trembling. The fear wasn't just of losing someone, but of losing the image I had of him, and even worse, the image I had of myself. I got up slowly, like someone about to do something forbidden. I opened the wardrobe and took out the most neutral clothes I had. Dark pants, a simple blouse, a jacket that wouldn't attract attention. I tied my hair back, put on quiet sneakers, and tried not to make any noise that could give her away. The house seemed to breathe with me, as if the walls were silently watching the scene I never thought I would live through. Before leaving the room, I stopped in front of the mirror. I stared at myself for a few seconds. The woman reflected there was no longer the same woman who believed any excuse. There was fear in their eyes, yes, a lot of fear. But there was something new as well, determination. I took a deep breath, 1, 2, 3 times. I knew that what I was about to do could change everything. Following him meant opening the door to truth, and once opened, it never closes again. I went down the stairs slowly, holding onto the handrail so I wouldn't trip. From the hallway, I saw the faint glow coming from the garage. I heard the sound of the engine starting. He didn't suspect a thing. I opened the back door, went out into the yard, and circled around the side of the house, using the darkness to my advantage. I felt like an intruder in my own life, someone who needs to hide to understand the reality of her own marriage. My car was parked on the street, as always. I went inside without turning on the interior lights, waiting for him to drive out first. The automatic gate opened, and I saw the red lights slowly moving away. I waited for a small distance to form between us, and then started the engine. The sound seemed deafening to me, but out there, in the empty early morning, everything was even more discreet than my terrified mind could perceive. As I followed him, I kept my headlights low, trying to maintain enough distance not to attract attention, but close enough not to lose sight of him. The streets were deserted, with only a few lampposts, illuminating the way with that sad yellow light, which gave the situation an almost cinematic feel. There I was, in the middle of the night, following my own husband's car, as if he were a stranger. It was at that moment that true fear was fully revealed. It wasn't just fear of what I might see. It was the fear of confirming what I already knew, deep down, for a long time. My heart was pounding so hard I could almost hear it. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and I had to wipe them on. My legs from time to time to avoid losing control. Every turn he made seemed like a test of my courage. If he turns right, I keep going. If he turns left, I turn around. I made this pact with myself at every corner, trying to find an escape route that, deep down, I knew I wouldn't use. The city streets, seen at 3 a.m, seemed like another reality. Closed shops, dark buildings, few cars passing by, and in the middle of that empty scene, only 2 vehicles were moving. His, in a front, and mine, behind. Car following car, as if we were connected on a route that only he knew, and I was trying to decipher. I noticed everything. He wasn't driving distractedly. He wasn't wandering aimlessly. He followed specific routes safely, like someone who always takes the same route. He didn't take the avenue that led downtown. He didn't turn towards the area where the office was located. He didn't approach any place that I recognized as part of our routine. With each kilometer, the tension increased. What if he realizes he's being followed? What if he finds out it's me? What if I discover something I can't stand? The truth is, at that moment, I was just as afraid of being seen as I was of seeing. But still, I continued. At an intersection, he stopped at a red light. I held the car a little further back, pretending to be just another vehicle. I looked at the clock on the dashboard, 3:17 a.m. That is, he had already been driving this route for at least 15 minutes. It wasn't an impulse. It wasn't something quick. It was a commitment. The light turned green, and he went ahead. He turned onto a narrower street, then an even darker one, until we reached a part of town I didn't frequent. It was an old area, with old warehouses, simple houses, and some vacant lots, the kind of place where secrets like to hide. As my car glided silently behind his, I felt something I had never felt before, the certainty that, from that point on, there was no turning back. I was, in fact, crossing the border between the version of life he was showing me and the version of life he lived when he thought I was asleep. When he finally slowed down to turn onto an even more secluded street, I felt my stomach churn. I took a deep breath, swallowed the tears that threatened to rise, and gripped the steering wheel tightly. I didn't know what I would find at the end of that journey, but I knew that if I went home without finding out, I would never have peace again. And so it was, with fear sitting in the passenger seat and courage hidden somewhere in my chest, that I made the hardest decision of my life. I continued following my husband's car through that empty dawn, toward a truth that could change everything. Following him through the early hours of the morning had already put me on such high alert that every muscle in my body seemed to vibrate. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the path he began to take. It was as if, after we left the familiar streets, he crossed an invisible border and entered a territory that didn't belong to any part of our life together. A territory I never knew existed, and that he clearly knew all too well. The first few kilometers were still recognizable. They were streets I used to take to go to the market, avenues we frequented on weekends, neighborhoods that were part of our shared world. But suddenly, he made an unexpected turn, then another, and entered an area I only knew by hearsay. It was as if I were crossing over, along with him, to a side of the city that wasn't part of my reality. The modern buildings began to disappear in the rearview mirror, replaced by old constructions with peeling facades and broken glass windows. The street lights gradually dimmed, as if each lit lamppost marked the end of a safe zone and the beginning of something forbidden. hidden. The city seemed to change its personality as we moved forward. It became quieter, denser, more mysterious, and I felt it in my chest, as if I were breathing a different air. With each street he turned onto, I thought, why do you know this path? Why does this seem so natural to you? Where exactly are you taking me? I kept the car at a calculated distance. I tried to look like just another sleepless driver wandering around in the early hours. But the truth is, I didn't look natural at all. My hands were shaking so much that I had to grip the steering wheel tightly to avoid losing control. Cold sweat trickled down the back of my neck, and my heart was beating at such an abnormal rhythm that it seemed to have a life of its own. At various points, he slowed down to make tight turns, and I had to pretend I was just slowing down by chance. At each red light, I kept a greater distance than usual, praying he wouldn't look in his rearview mirror. The feeling of committing a crime haunted me, even though I was the only one in that story who just wanted to find out the truth. Still, the fear of being seen was real, visceral. I hid behind the shadows of other parked cars, using lampposts, corners, anything to avoid being obvious. My whole body was on high alert, as if every part of me had turned into a sensor. Everything mattered: the speed, the angle of the headlights, the car's position, even my breathing. There was a moment when he stopped abruptly at an intersection, and I held my breath, feeling panic rise in my throat like wildfire. If he looked in the rearview mirror at that exact moment, it would all be over. But he didn't look. He simply moved on. That's when I realized something even more disturbing. He was far too comfortable on that strange route. He didn't hesitate. He didn't slow down to get his bearings. He showed no doubt about which street to take. It was as if he were going to a familiar place, where his presence was nothing new. This idea hurt me deeply. I was discovering, block by block, that my husband had a life that didn't include my knowledge, that there were paths he frequented in, the dark, paths that had never been walked by my side. He drove through a neighborhood I would never have dared to cross alone. The houses there were small, with stained walls, rusty gates, and barred windows. There were vacant lots, streets with almost no lighting, and parked cars that looked abandoned. It was as if we were entering an area forgotten by the city, but not by him. He drove with familiarity, like someone who recognizes landmarks invisible to anyone else. And that's when this scene hit me hard. His life had aspects that I had never seen before. Routines that didn't involve us. Secrets that didn't fit into the narrative of a happy marriage he always sold. With each passing minute, my adrenaline surged. Tension surged through my body as if I were being pulled into a suspenseful situation that wouldn't end well. And worst of all, the more fear I felt, the stronger the need to continue became. I repeated it mentally, as if it were a mantra that prevented me from giving up. I was trembling, but I couldn't go back home without answers. Going back meant admitting that I was afraid of the truth, and I was already tired of being afraid. At one point, he turned right and entered a street so narrow that my car would barely fit if I were behind his. I had to stop before, parking somewhat crookedly, somewhat hidden, holding my breath, praying that he wouldn't notice the headlights reflecting in the rearview mirror. I waited a few seconds, watching. He continued on as if that street were just another stretch of the road. I had to drive around the entire block, almost losing track of him. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Finally, I reached the next avenue and saw him again. The taillights of his car were like headlights in a dark sea, guiding me to a place I didn't want to see, but needed to. He then turned onto a wider but poorly lit road that led to an even more isolated part of the city, almost a border, between urban and rural areas, the kind of place no one goes to without a reason. I approached slowly, observing the spaced-out lampposts, the old sheds in the distance, the trees that cast even more eerie shadows. And it was on this road that I realized my fear was no longer just about what I would find, but who would I meet? Who was the man driving that car? The same one who slept in my bed? Or a stranger I've never met? I continued despite the panic. I continued, despite my trembling hands. I continued on, despite the overwhelming urge to turn around and run home. Because at that point, one thing was clear. I wasn't just following my husband's car. I was following the truth, and it was much closer than I imagined. The dark road seemed endless. The further I followed it, the more I felt I was moving away, not only from the city center, but from the center of the life I knew. The lights of familiar neighborhoods were long gone, and now what surrounded us was an almost deserted landscape, with few streetlights, old warehouses, empty lots, and buildings that seemed forgotten by time. Suddenly, he slowed down. My heart mimicked the movement, only in reverse. The more the car slowed down, the more my chest seemed to race. He signaled and turned onto an even darker side street, lined with high walls and old facades. I kept my distance and then went in, afraid the sound of the engine would give away my presence. There, it felt like I was entering a place where nobody should be at that hour. It was the kind of street you avoid even during the day, let alone in the middle of the night. That's when I saw him slow down completely and pull the car over next to a large old building with peeling paint and tall windows, many of them broken or boarded up with wood. One of the windows on the facade still had an old, almost illegible sign that hinted at what that place must have once been. I could only make out a few words faded by dust and time. Clinic, something. Municipal. It seemed to have been a hospital, a kind of health center or public clinic, abandoned for years. My husband stopped the car there, in that place. That setting was completely different from everything I knew about him. I didn't pull my car over right behind him. I kept driving slowly, past him, and parked a few meters ahead, near a dry tree, as if I were just someone aimlessly searching for a place to turn around. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, pretending to myself that I still had control of the situation. But deep down, I already knew. That point was the turning point. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him getting out of the car. He closed the door carefully, as if entering a place that demanded silence, respect, or secrecy. He was wearing the same neutral clothes he had left home in, but now, under the dim light of the only street lamp, he seemed like a different person. His shoulders were heavier, his body more tense. He looked around, making sure no one was nearby. My heart froze for that second. If he saw me there, it would all be over. But I also knew, if I left without finding out what he was doing there, I would never sleep peacefully again. He walked toward the side entrance of the building, an iron door with peeling paint that looked too rusty to be used, but it wasn't. He pushed it firmly, as if he already knew the exact spot where the structure would give way without making too much noise. This wasn't improvisation. He knew this place. He knew exactly what he was doing there. That image is etched in my mind. My husband, at a little after 3 in the morning, casually entered an abandoned building in the middle of a forgotten neighborhood, as if it were the most familiar address in the world to him. "Who are you?" I thought, not out loud, so as not to be heard, but inside me, that question echoed like a scream. I took a deep breath and turned off the car. I stood there for a few seconds just observing, trying to understand if there was anyone else there, if there was any movement, if any lights were turning on. At first, everything was just shadow and silence, but after a few moments, I noticed a sliver of light escaping through a lower window on the side of the building, partially covered by a poorly nailed piece of wood, a weak, yellowish light, like that of an old lamp. I lowered myself slightly on the bench, as if that would make me invisible, and watched that shy gleam. He hadn't entered an emptier place. Inside, something was happening. The adrenaline rush intensified. I felt tingling in my legs, even while sitting. My chest rose and fell rapidly, as if I had run for miles. My mind, in turn, raced even faster. 1,000 scenarios played out in my head. Was he meeting with someone? Could it have been some kind of secret meeting? Could he have been involved in something illegal? Or was he secretly helping someone? The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. And at the same time, the more confused I became, the clearer it became that this reality didn't match at all the image he always sold me. That of an ordinary man, an office worker, with a predictable routine and a simple life. Nothing in that scenario matched our living room, our bedroom, our dining table. I needed to get closer. I opened the car door slowly, as if the early morning air might betray my presence. The night chill hit my face, mixed with the smell of dampness, mold, and earth. I closed the door, silently, and began walking along the sidewalk, pretending I was just someone passing by. Although, deep down, I knew that no one passes by chance, much less at that hour. I approached with short steps, trying to keep my breathing under control. With each step, the image of the building grew larger, more frightening, more real. Now I could see details: stains on the walls, graffiti scribbles, broken windows patched with boards, a sign fallen on the ground, a crooked side gate. That old hospital or clinic seemed to carry heavy stories, abandoned along with the patients who once passed through there. And in the midst of that almost cinematic scene, the only living thing was the light escaping through the crack in the window. My whole body seemed to be pulled there. I knew that running at that moment would be easier, perhaps even safer. But I also knew that if I ran away, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what was behind that door, inside that building, in that other life he lived far from my eyes. It seemed that, up until then, everything had been a prologue. Now I was facing the beginning of the truth. I stopped behind a parked car a little further ahead, using it as a barrier, and looked again at the side entrance he had passed through. No sign of him, no movement, only the continuous glow of the light from inside. I crouched down a little, trying to see better through the side of the building. It was difficult to see anything, but just knowing that he was in there, in a place I had never heard of, was enough to make my mind spin. And it was impossible not to think. If someone told me this story, and I was just part of the audience, I myself would find it strange. I myself would create theories. I myself would say, something is very wrong here, because that scenario was completely out of touch with his reality. At least, that's the reality he showed me. I was faced with a man who claimed to spend nights in the office, and who was now entering with familiarity an abandoned building in a remote neighborhood at 3 in the morning. How could I reconcile these two versions? How could I continue telling myself the same comfortable story I had been repeating for years? There, on that cold sidewalk in front of that forgotten building, I understood that my life had split into two parallel lines, the life I thought I had, and the life I was about to discover. And once again, the phrase echoed within me, like an undeniable truth. I was trembling, but I couldn't go back home without answers. Not after getting this far. Not after seeing with my own eyes the place where he was hiding from me. Not after realizing that that abandoned building knew more about my husband than I did myself. I hid behind that parked car, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like the whole building could hear it. The cold morning air burned my lungs, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on the illuminated window, that single crack that revealed that inside that forgotten place, something was happening. Something that included my husband, and that completely excluded me. For a few minutes, nothing happened. I stood there, motionless, waiting. My hands trembled, but I pressed them against my coat, trying to convince myself that I still had some control over the situation. But inside, I already knew I had gone too far, that what I would see from then on would not be easy to accept. And yet, the need to find out was greater than the fear of suffering. Then, finally, the silence was broken. A shadow moved within the crack of the window. At first, I thought it was someone else passing by, but as the figure drew close enough, the small beam of light clearly outlined it. It was him, my husband. He was carrying a large box in his arms. It didn't seem heavy, but it wasn't light either. It was that typical cardboard box from a warehouse, reinforced with brown tape on the sides. He placed it on a rusty table and quickly returned to some darker spot in the hallway. The speed at which he moved indicated familiarity. He knew where he was, he knew the way, he knew exactly what he was looking for. The first thing I felt was a chill running through my body. What kind of stuff do you keep in an abandoned building? I asked myself mentally, clutching my coat as if it could protect me from the shock of the scene. A few seconds later, he reappeared, this time dragging another even larger box. The way he bent down, how he stood up, how he arranged the objects, revealed that this was no improvisation. He wasn't there for the first time. He wasn't experimenting. He did this with practice. I, watching, could barely breathe. When he opened one of the boxes, I could see that there were materials inside. Rolled up papers, pots of dried paint, pieces of thin wood, something that looked like fabric or canvas, tools. The yellow light didn't make everything perfectly clear, but it was enough for me to know that none of it matched the man who slept next to me every night. He was rummaging through the box as if he were organizing something, or separating, or preparing. It was impossible to understand exactly what it was doing, but the mere sight of it was disturbing enough. Because at that moment, as I watched him moving objects, checking materials, going in and out of that corroded side door, a painful truth formed within me. With the precision of a blade, my husband, the man I thought I knew, was living a different life. There, not a symbolic life, not a small secret, one real life concrete, with routine, with tasks, with specific objects stored in boxes, in a building where he never mentioned having been. The shock didn't come as a scream. It came as a deafening silence. A weight pushed me against the sidewalk, almost making me lose my balance. I felt my eyes burning, not from tears, but from disbelief. It was as if someone had removed a blindfold I didn't even know existed. Everything I thought I knew about him, his values, his habits, his preferences, his character, seemed to have been only the surface of something much deeper and much more hidden. He disappeared for a few seconds inside the building, and I used that brief interval to take a deep breath, even though the dry air trembled on my lips. A question grew inside me like a desperate echo. How long has this other life existed? How long have I been sleeping next to a man who guards boxes in an abandoned hospital? And why did he never tell me? When he reappeared, he was not alone. That was the second fall of the night. The first was seeing the boxes. The second was seeing another person approaching. An older man, gray hair. He looked tired, perhaps ill. He wasn't someone I recognized. He was saying something to my husband, pointing to the boxes, gesturing with concern. My husband nodded. He nodded as if receiving instructions, like someone following a routine. I held my breath. The scene seemed too surreal to be true. They talked for a few moments. Nothing very long, nothing very lively. It was, in fact, a practical, serious conversation. Then the man walked away, disappearing down the hallway, and my husband went back to rummaging through the boxes as if it were part of a job I never knew he had. From that moment on, everything inside my heart crumbled. How could I trust someone who kept an entire version of themselves locked behind rusty doors and broken windows? How could I justify years of confidences, laughter, dinners, trips, hugs, if there was a version of him there that I had never known? I wanted to go back home. I wanted to run away. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But my feet were firmly planted on the ground by the truth. The truth is that he wasn't just a tired man. It wasn't just someone with work-related stress. It wasn't just someone going through a phase. He led a double life, a clandestine routine, a venue that didn't include our wedding. And as I watched him push a heavy box into a dark room, I felt something inside me break at such a deep point that I no longer knew how to put the pieces back together. Because there, in that sliver of light, in that abandoned building, in that silent dawn, I witnessed the greatest betrayal of all, the betrayal of truth. I was still hiding, huddled behind that parked car, when something inside me finally decided that watching from afar wasn't enough anymore. Seeing my husband carrying boxes in an abandoned building, talking to a stranger, acting like he was working a second, secret job, it was all consuming me from the inside. I needed to get closer. I needed, for the first time in a long time, to face the truth head-on. I took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling that gripped my legs, and began to approach the side of the building, where the darkness was greater and the streetlights barely reached. The smell of mold, dust, and dampness grew more intense with each step. It was as if that place had been locked in time, frozen between what was and what would never be again. But behind that abandonment, there was life. I knew. I had seen the light. I had seen my husband. I had seen the boxes. I reached the side of the building, where the window with the sliver of light was a little lower. The wood that covered almost the entire opening had a small gap, as if someone had purposefully left a crack there. I crouched down, held my breath, and looked. What I saw on the other side was not what I expected. I imagined. Finding a typical scene of betrayal. A woman, an improvised bed, drinks, hidden laughter. Or perhaps something criminal. Boxes of stolen goods, weapons, money, anything that would fit the script of someone who lies about their job and disappears at 3 a.m. But it wasn't anything like that. What I saw was a small, makeshift room lit by dim lamps hanging from exposed wires. There were mattresses on the floor, some blankets, a table with medicines arranged in rows, bottles of water, bags with folded clothes. The whole place exuded neglect, but at the same time, it carried a visible effort of care, as if someone were trying to transform a forgotten place into a shelter. And then I saw the people. There were at least 8 of them inside. A lady with completely white hair, sitting in a chair, holding a mug with both trembling hands. A young woman with a face marked by old bruises, hugging a child no more than 6 years old. 2 excessively thin men, with tired looks, leaning against the wall. A young man with a bandaged arm. They were faces that seemed to have seen more pain than anyone should be able to endure. And in the middle of them, there he was, my husband. With an open box at his feet, he took out packaged foods, packets of rice, canned goods, bread. He picked up the items carefully, as if each package carried something sacred, and distributed them among the people with a calmness I hadn't seen in him for a long time. The weight I saw in his eyes at home. There it seemed to have a different meaning. My heart started racing in a completely different way. I was paralyzed, my eyes wide, trying to understand what I was seeing. He wasn't betraying his family. I wasn't in a bar. I wasn't in a motel. I wasn't with another woman. He was helping people. People who, in the eyes of the rest of the world, might not even exist. I saw him kneel before the white-haired woman and gently take her hand, asking something I couldn't hear. She smiled, a weak, grateful smile, as if he were the only light in that dark world. He picked up a folded blanket and placed it on her lap, adjusting it delicately. Then he turned to the young woman with the child in her arms and handed her a package of small clothes, probably for the boy. The girl cried quietly. He didn't move away. He touched her shoulder in a silent gesture of support. I felt my eyes welling up with tears. That scene, it was completely incompatible with the cold, distant, and evasive man I used to see silently enter and silently leave through the door of our house. At that moment, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. He was living a whole life that I didn't know about. Not a life of luxury or hidden pleasures, but a life of secret, of sacrifice, of blame, and perhaps of fear of being misunderstood. The older man I had seen earlier returned to his side, now holding a clipboard. They spoke briefly. It seemed they were organizing something, perhaps a list, a register, a grocery count. At one point, my husband ran a hand over his face as if exhausted, and I recognized that gesture. I had seen him do the same at home, when he thought no one was looking, but I had no idea that this tiredness didn't come from spreadsheets and meetings, but from something much deeper. I was so shocked that I had to turn my face away from the window for a few seconds. I leaned my back against the cold wall of the building and let the air out of my lungs in a trembling breath. My husband, the man I thought I knew, was living another life there. And this realization, while relieving me in one way, because he wasn't cheating on me with another woman, destroyed me in another. How could he hide all of this from me? How could he carry that weight alone? And most importantly, who, after all, had I loved all these years? The version he showed me, or this person who spent nights in an abandoned building helping people the world had forgotten? When I looked through the crack again, I saw something even more revealing. One of the men leaning against the wall began to feel unwell. He clutched his chest, bent forward, and despair filled the faces of the others. My husband rushed to him with an agility I had never seen before. He knelt down, cupped the young man's face, spoke firmly, and told him to breathe deeply. The older man appeared with a bag of medicine, and my husband helped find what seemed to be the right pill. That wasn't improvised. It wasn't an attempt. It was routine. He knew what to do. I had been in that kind of situation before. That's when it hit me even harder. This wasn't just a makeshift shelter. It was a kind of clandestine refuge, a place for vulnerable, invisible people, without documents, without a home, without family, without protection. And my husband was one of the few people keeping that place standing. When the young man finally calmed down, my husband slowly stepped away, breathing deeply, resting his hands on his knees, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. I could see the sweat on his forehead, even from that distance. I could see the exhaustion. I could see the overwhelming responsibility he carried without ever having shared even a fragment of that truth with me. And there, outside, in the cold of the early morning, I understood why he had been so distant from me. Why did he always seem tired? Why did he avoid long conversations? Why did he wake up at 3 a.m. as if he had an unavoidable appointment with the darkness? He had it. And this commitment was not to another woman. It involved lives, with broken stories, with people who depended on him for shelter, medicine, food, a little dignity. The shattering of expectations was so violent that I didn't know whether I wanted to hug him or yell at him. Because while I felt a pang of pride seeing that the man I married was capable of something so great, so generous, I also felt devastating pain that he had chosen to live it away from me. Because she chose to share her heart with strangers, but not to share the truth with herself. I no longer knew if he was a silent hero, or someone who decided that I wasn't strong enough to know the truest version of his life. And that doubt, in a way, hurt more than any classic betrayal. Because betrayal is something we point out, define, and name. But what do you call it when the person you love turns into a stranger, for doing good in secret? At that moment, standing by that window, I discovered the secret that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My husband simply had nowhere else to be. He had another world, whole, complex, profound, in which I simply did not exist. I don't know how long I stood there, observing that universe hidden through the crack in the window. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. Time, at that moment, ceased to be a line and became a pressure inside my chest, squeezing, suffocating, pushing my emotions to the limit. I was facing the truest version of my husband, and at the same time, the version he most feared I would find. At some point, my body made it clear that I could no longer watch from afar. My legs were trembling, but they carried me to the side door of the building. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like I was about to walk through a minefield. And the mind was a whirlwind of questions, pains, theories, contained anger and a wounded love that still didn't know how to position itself in the face of it all. I placed my hand on the rusty doorknob, took a deep breath, and pushed. The door opened with a low creak, but enough to cut through the fragile silence of the hallway. The sound echoed off the cold walls, and instantly my husband lifted his face toward the entrance. Time stopped there, right there. When he saw me, he froze. It was like watching an entire building collapse in slow motion. His eyes widened, his breath hitched, and his shoulders, always so tense, slumped as if he had finally understood that all the lies he had told up to that point had come to an end. He stood paralyzed in the middle of the hallway, clutching a box in his hands as if he didn't know what to do with his own body. I took a step inside. Another one. The dim light of the lamp cast shadows on the walls, and I could clearly see the mixture of shock, fear, and guilt painted on his face. And it was in that instant that I realized he wasn't prepared to be seen, not by me. What are you doing here? He whispered, almost losing his voice. I could ask the same question, I replied, my voice trembling but firm. But I think you should answer first. He slowly dropped the box on the floor, as if any sudden movement could break something, and, in a way, everything was already broken. He ran a hand over his face, took several deep breaths, as if trying to organize years of secrets into a few words. I can explain, he said finally. I hope you can, I replied, because I just followed you halfway through the city, at 3 a.m, to an abandoned building, and now I see that it's not so abandoned after all. He looked around, as if he were seeing the scene through my eyes for the first time. The misery, the mattresses, the frail people, the boxes of food, the makeshift materials, the world he knew so well, and which he had kept so far from me. You shouldn't be here, he repeated, almost pleading. But you should be. Shouldn't. You? I retorted. You should be here. You should be living this part of your life, this part that you hid from me. He took a few steps towards me, but without daring to get too close. It felt like any approach could make me explode. And he was right. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. His voice came out low, broken, as if he were scratching his own throat. And then, something inside me finally broke. Hurt me? I said, laughing humorlessly. You leave home at 3 a.m, lie about where you are, say you're at work while the office is closed, come back smelling strange, avoid looking me in the eye, and all this because you didn't want to hurt me? He lowered his head. It was the first time in a long time that I had seen him as a child. I thought you wouldn't understand, he admitted. I thought it would scare you. I thought it was too much responsibility to put on you. And at first I just wanted to help. It was supposed to be a small thing. Just a few people. Just for a while. But after you start to see, after you look into their eyes, you can't walk away. The silence that followed seemed even heavier than the confession. You should have trusted me, I said, feeling my voice falter. I'm your wife, your home, your partner. I was the person you could share everything with. I didn't want to share this burden with you, he replied, returning her gaze with raw honesty. I already saw how much my work worried you. I didn't want to add more sleepless nights, more fear, more pain. I thought I was protecting you. That sentence tore something apart inside me. Protecting. That word always sounds nice, until it becomes a justification for lies. Sometimes the truth hurts, but lies destroy, I said, tears finally welling up. He put his hand to his face, as if he had been hit, because that's exactly what happened. He tried to come closer, but I took a step back. You can't expect me to understand this overnight, I continued, my voice trembling. I had no idea who you became when you left home. I had no idea there were people depending on you. I had no idea you were hiding boxes in an abandoned shed. I had no idea about anything. I know, he replied, and that's why I need to tell you everything. Now, the whole truth. No more hiding anything. Because you're here, and because I can't lose you. Lose me? I repeated. Didn't you realize you'd already lost me when you decided to remove me from this part of your life? He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and opened them again. this time with a determination I hadn't seen since it all began. "So let me try to recover," he said. "Even if it hurts. Even if you hate me at first. I need to explain. I need you to see the reason. I need you to know why I'm here. Every night." I swallowed hard. He seemed sincere. He seemed broken. He seemed vulnerable. And for the first time, I realized that that hidden life wasn't driven by selfishness, but because of guilt, through suffering, for something I didn't yet understand, but was about to hear. "Speak," I said, wiping away tears. "If you have a truth to tell me now, here, at 3 in the morning, in the place where you hid the part of yourself that you didn't have the courage to show me." Because there, right in front of him, I already knew, if there was any chance of rebuilding anything, it began at that very moment. And with the truth, whole, raw, and inevitable, he took a deep breath. So deep, it seemed like he was trying to draw courage from the air that he didn't possess. I stood there, frozen, my heart racing, trying to prepare myself for a truth I didn't know if I wanted to hear, but needed to. He stood before me as I had never seen him before, defenseless, without ready-made excuses, without that mask of a confident and rational man. He was a different person. He was the man behind it all, the man who had lived 2 lives and was now about to tell me why. "I don't even know where to begin," he said, running a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. "Start with the truth," I replied. "The whole truth, not the version you think I can handle." He nodded. For a moment, I thought it was going to collapse, but he started. "This place," he said, looking at the makeshift room, "didn't start out this big. It didn't start as a shelter. It didn't start with boxes or medicine or people. It started with just one person." I frowned. "One person?" I asked, trying to understand. "Try." He looked away, staring at the ground as if reliving something painful. 2 years ago, when I was coming home late from work, I found a man passed out on the sidewalk near the old station. He was injured, shivering from the cold, and nobody stopped to help. Everyone just walked around, pretending not to see. I couldn't do the same. His words carried weight, the weight of a memory, burden of guilt. "I took him to the car," he continued, "and tried to find a place to leave him. I went to 2 hospitals, but one was full. The other refused treatment due to lack of documents. I spent hours trying to figure something out, and in the end, I ended up bringing him here." "Why here?" I asked. "Why an abandoned building?" "Because I already knew this building. Many years ago, my mother worked as a volunteer here when it was still a community clinic. After it closed, she continued to come occasionally to help people in the area. I would come with her sometimes. It was small, but it was all there was. I knew the place still had a roof, running water in some places, and was far from the city's problems. It was the only safe place that came to mind. That caught me completely off guard. The image of him as a young man, helping his mother in a place like that. It didn't match at all the version he always showed me. I took care of that man for 2 days," he continued, his voice growing heavier. "I gave him food, water, cleaned his wounds. He recovered, and then he was gone. But before he left, he asked me one thing. Don't forget about us." I didn't understand, until weeks later, someone else showed up, and then another, and another. I felt the ground slowly disappear beneath my feet. "How can someone keep a secret like that for so long?" he continued. "I started by bringing food, blankets, basic medicine, small things you wouldn't even notice you were missing at home, because I always made sure everything was the same there. But, over time, the number of people increased. That neighborhood began to be seen as a dumping ground. Many people fleeing violence, many lost people, many people who no longer had family." He ran his hand over his face. His eyes were red, not from crying, yet, but from exhaustion. "For years, carrying a burden alone. I thought about telling you. I swear I thought about it. Many times." His voice broke for the first time. "But in the beginning, it was so small. It seemed temporary. It seemed like it would end soon. I kept telling myself, when this is over, I'll tell you everything. But it didn't end. It didn't finish. It just grew. The silence that followed was devastating. I felt my emotions battling inside me like 2 opposing forces. Anger, because he hid it from me. Compassion, because he carried it all by himself. "You could have trusted me," I said in a low voice. "I know," he replied, looking straight into my eyes. "But I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked, even knowing the answer would hurt. He took a deep breath, and when she spoke, it was the starkest truth of the night. I was afraid you would ask me to stop. I was afraid you would say that this was destroying me. I was afraid you wouldn't understand why I needed to continue. A tear rolled down his face. It was the first one. And strangely, it didn't bring me relief. It brought me more pain. I've seen you suffer for much less. I've seen you spend sleepless nights when I stayed late at the office. I've seen you anxious when I disappeared for a few hours. I didn't want to put that burden on you. And, at the same time, I didn't know how to stop. I swallowed hard. The intensity of the confession hit me hard. So you lied, I said. Yes, he replied, without flinching. I lied, and each lie weighed more than the last. I hated myself for it, but every time I came here and saw one of those people smile because they received a meal, or because they managed to sleep safely, or because someone treated an injury, I couldn't go home and just tell them. I felt that if I told you, you would look at me in a way that I didn't know if I was ready to see. The way I'm looking right now? I asked. He looked away, because he knew that, at that moment, I was looking at him with a mixture of love and devastation. I don't know, he said, his voice trembling. What hurts the most is seeing that, in the end, I did exactly what I feared. I hurt you. Not because of what I do here, but because I didn't share this with you. I felt my chest tighten again. It was incredible how so much pain and so much admiration could coexist. How could he be so generous to strangers? And so cruel to me, through exclusion? He continued, almost in a whisper. I didn't live a parallel life because I wanted to hide who I am. I lived because I thought you deserved a lighter version of me. I know I made a mistake, a big mistake, and I understand if you never trust me the same way again. But that's the truth, the whole truth. The hallway fell silent for long seconds, perhaps minutes. I don't know. All I know is that, there, in front of him, part of me wanted to hug him, another group wanted to scream, and another part wanted to sit on the floor and cry until they fainted. And this is the kind of moment that it divides the audience. Half will say, he's a hero. The other half will shout, he betrayed you with the worst lie, a secret life. And that's precisely why the truth is so cruel. Because, as I said before, sometimes the truth hurts, but lies destroy. I took a deep breath, very deep, and he said, I still don't know how I feel. I don't know if I can forgive. I don't know if I want to forgive. But now, at least, I know who you really are. And that phrase, it marked the beginning of what was to come. The silence that settled between us after his explanation was so profound it seemed to fill the entire building. Outside, the early morning continued to breathe its cold air, indifferent to the collapse happening inside that abandoned warehouse. Inside, my heart pounded, as if I had just run a marathon, tired, wounded, but still pulsing. I looked at him for long seconds, trying to understand where the man I loved ended and where the man I didn't know began. He stood there waiting. It was as if he were on the edge of an abyss, waiting for me to decide whether to pull him back, or if you would drop it. And the truth is, at that moment, even I didn't know what the next step would be. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, breathing deeply, letting the air in slowly, trying to organize my thoughts. I had two possibilities before me, two completely opposite realities, both legitimate. And while my emotions fought amongst themselves, I realized that I needed to see each path honestly. When I opened my eyes again, there was a part of me that wanted to try to understand, to try to embrace, to try to rebuild, not out of weakness, not out of dependence, but because seeing that man helping people forgotten by the world ignited something in me that I didn't know existed, a deep compassion, mixed with an equally strong pain. I took a few steps closer, just enough for him to realize I was still there. He lifted his face, tears he had been trying to hide, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: vulnerability. Not the kind that comes from excuses, but the kind that comes from truth. You should have told me, I said, my voice firm but less aggressive. I know, he replied, and every day that I didn't tell, it was harder to tell later. There was truth there. There was genuine regret, and there was love, even if it was hurt. I looked around the room again, at the mattresses, the makeshift remedies, the people in silence, and I thought, if he managed to dedicate so many early mornings to caring for strangers, perhaps there was still room to rebuild what was broken between us. I don't know how it's going to be, I said. I don't know how long it will take. I don't know if I can promise I'll trust you like I used to. But if you want to rebuild this with me, then we'll try. No lies, no hiding places, no abandoned sheds at 3 a.m. He took a deep breath, as if he had received back half the soul he thought he had lost. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. "Whatever you ask, whatever you need. I don't want to spend half my life away from you anymore." I felt the lump in my throat loosen, not because everything was resolved, but because, for the first time in a long time, I saw the will, the desire to get it right, a desire to be transparent, a desire to heal and to heal myself along with her. "So let's begin like this," I said, "with the truth, all of it, from now on." And for the first time that morning, he smiled, a small, tired, but genuine smile. A smile from someone who knew they had been forgiven enough to try, but not enough to relax. This would be a fresh start, a tough, slow restart, full of scars, but a real fresh start. But there was also another possibility, an equally legitimate, equally strong, equally courageous possibility. I could look at him and see not only the pain of the lie, but the loss of identity. I could see that for years I had lived alongside a version of him that never fully existed. I could understand that, even if he hadn't done anything morally wrong, he had broken something that cannot be repaired, the silent trust, the kind that sustains a home. I took a few steps back, breathing deeply. "I understand what you're doing here," I said, my voice low. "And I understand that it's important, very important, perhaps even more important than anything I can comprehend." He took a step towards me, but I raised my hand, asking him to stop. "But you chose to live this alone. You chose to hide it from me. And when someone we love chooses to live far away from us, even sleeping next to us, it's very difficult to come back." He felt the blow. I saw it in his eyes. "I love you," he said, his voice faltering. "I know," I replied. "But sometimes love isn't enough." He remained silent, and I continued. "You had another life, a life I never knew, a life you preferred to keep hidden, even knowing it was slowly destroying me. And now that I've seen all this, I don't know who you are anymore. And even worse, I don't know who I am anymore when I'm with you." Tears streamed down her face, not just his, mine too. "I need time," I said. "I need to find myself. Again. I need to understand where I ended up and where you started to drift away. Maybe one day we can look at each other again without pain. Maybe not. But now, I need to go." He tried to say something, but no sound came out, and I turned my back. Leaving that building was one of the hardest decisions of my life, but it was also an act of courage, because that was the moment I understood that I wasn't losing my husband. I was finding myself. When I got outside, I felt the cold wind hit my face. The early morning was still the same, silent, dark, mysterious, but I was no longer the same woman who had crossed it hours before. His early mornings hid more than a secret. They hid a truth that I needed to see in order to discover who I was. And that was perhaps the biggest revelation of that night. If this story has captivated you this far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue bringing you deep stories, full of mystery and revelations like this one. And tell me in the comments, would you have the courage to follow your partner at 3 a.m.?